So yes,
just to clarify, our first midterm is on the 12th, right, of March?
Yeah, that's a Friday. That is correct.
Okay. Okay.
So we have what, roughly 3 weeks before that. So yeah, I mean, again, as I said on Monday, you have time to catch up, because I know some of you have not been, keeping the pace with either the live and or the recorded lectures and the readings. So I mean, you have time to catch up, but don't overestimate your ability to do so, because as I said, this is not about memorization. You need to read, understand, process, and the questions are not going to be true and false. I mean, the questions are going to be very similar to the questions in the study guides, open-ended questions. And I'm going to read every single word that every one of you is going to write. And believe me, I've done this for a while, so I can very quickly tell whether you read, whether you know what you're talking about. And, in some cases, I may disagree with your position, but that doesn't imply that I am going to take some points off. This is not about, being right or wrong. I really want you to express what you think about whatever based on the material. And that's the point. I really want you to read. I don't want to impose any view, any particular agenda. That's really your job to make up your mind and well, explain that to me in some of the questions. Some of the questions are obviously going to be based on pure knowledge, and again, I can tell very quickly whether you read or not. But I can give you more hints as we approach, we get closer to the exams. For now, just keep sailing, keep sailing. Hopefully, you are enjoying the class, you are learning the lectures, and you're learning. So, okay. Any other question or comment? Let me get this off. Okay. So I am going to share my screen because we are going to start a brand new section. And this is called the role of the Latin American state. Now, actually, I'm gonna start this with the second half of this page to make a connection with what we have been covering for the last 4 or 5 weeks or whatever. So in this chapter, we are going to hopefully have a better sense of what should be the role of the government in Latin America, right? So far, we have seen, at least all the way to the ISI strategy, that the state, the government, was seen and was put as the engine of growth, right? That was I explained this the following way: the only entity large and powerful enough to launch and sustain this strategy. Well, so they thought, right? Obviously, we know that didn't work very well. The state was subject to this paradox. It was everywhere, omnipresent. At the same time, it got very weak, because the expenses that the government required or the government executed didn't have the counterbalance in tax revenue generation. So in traditional public finance, think about this. You generate $1 in tax revenue, a fiscal balance would say, okay, you spend $1. Or if you're talking about Mexico or Chile, well, if you are generating 1 Mexican pesos in tax revenue and you want to keep a balanced fiscal budget, you spend no more than $1,000 or Mexican pesos. But in this situation, especially when inflation started spiraling out of control, well, the expenses were increasing a lot more and the tax revenue was drying up. So there was an accumulation of internal debt, printing money, and at the same time, an accumulation of external debt. So, number 3, this debt crisis and this macroeconomic instability basically were forcing Latin America to reconsider the capabilities, the strengths, and the role of the state, the role of the government. And that's the whole issue of this chapter. So there is, right now, we're talking about the 1980s, the lost decade, the failure of the ISI strategy. So there was a very strong need for a new approach to economic development. And at the center of this discussion was, okay, what should the government role be? What are going to be the responsibilities and capabilities that we're going to assign to this very powerful entity in Latin America, right? So I don't want to put the government in a bad light. So actually, let me explain something that I promised I would, and I haven't. Although this is not a class about Asia, this is very important, guys, because at the same time that Latin America was launching this ISI strategy since the 40s, 50s, the 60s, and all the way to the 80s, well, guess what? Some East Asian economies, the so-called tigers or dragons of East Asia, were pursuing exactly the same policies of import substitution industrialization, the infant industry argument, tariffs, the same model, exactly the same model. Now, there was a big difference between what these dragons or tigers did compared to Latin America. So let me explain this. I'm gonna share my whiteboard, and I hopefully stay there. There we go. So can you see the whiteboard on the screen? Okay, good. So what you have there is the following. So on the x-axis right here, you have time. So this is basically time. Let me admit this person. All right, so you have time, and here you have some sort of measure of growth of economic development. Usually this is GDP per capita, right? So 40s, 50s, 60s, in blue you have Latin America, and in red you have East Asia. So this group of countries were pretty much doing okay, the same, and so forth. Now, East Asian countries did something that Latin American countries didn't. Well, a few things, but number one, they made a huge investment in human capital and physical capital. So in places like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, education and health were put at the center of this strategy. We need to develop a productive workforce. And for that, we need to invest in human capital. Well, in Latin America, they missed the boat on that. And physical capital as well. East Asian economies develop a huge amount of infrastructure, airports, seaports, highways, hospitals, bridges, train stations, all of these things. Well, in Latin America, for the most part, they missed that boat as well. Now, the other thing that East Asian economies did that unfortunately Latin America failed to do was the following. Mainly because of corruption, and maybe there's also some cultural elements at play here. The governments in Latin America said, you industries are going to be receiving protection for 10, 20 years. And East Asian countries did exactly the same, 10, 20 years. The difference was that after 10, 20 years in East Asia, the government actually said, okay, you know what, guys? Ready or not, the protection is over. You need to compete internationally, you need to survive, and you need to make it. Otherwise, you're on your own. In Latin America, again, because of corruption and other elements, these industries, when they were told, okay, your protective bubble is going to burst, they said, no, we are not ready. And of course, they started channeling money to government officers, bribing them. And then that's how they got an extension of another 5 years, and another 10 years, and another 5 years. So they never grew because they were always under this protective bubble. So what was the consequence of these two differences? Huge investment in physical and human capital, and the dismantling of the protection in East Asia, produce what we know. East Asia is developing, growing faster than Latin America, where at least during the 80s, actually, Latin America declined significantly in terms of well, pretty much every indicator. Unemployment was up, poverty was up, GDP per capita fell, and so forth. You already saw the picture. But anyway, I wanted to mention this because, we normally think of, the good guys, the bad guys, government versus market, and it's not that black and white, guys. In East Asia, the role of the government was critical. A good government, because they were the leaders, the orchestrators of this strategy, investing in infrastructure, investing in human capital, making sure that once they agree the protection had been enough for domestic industries to grow, they dismantled the protection and they kept on with that. They kept their word. So in Latin America, they didn't. But the point is, not all governments are good, not all governments are bad. And that's the point I'm trying to make here, right? So in Latin America, things didn't work out, the government failed. In East Asian economies, things seem to be going well, certainly better than Latin America, and the government was and is still behind most of those strategies. So yes, there is a significant amount of regulation, efficient regulation. There is a significant amount of taxation, efficient taxation. All of these things have to be qualified because not all regulation is bad, not all taxation is bad, right? So let's jump into this. Let's jump into this discussion in the context of Latin America. All right. So let me make a stop here. So to make sure I gather your thoughts or comments if you have any, guys. Cody.
Yeah, were the East Asian tigers suffering from the same sort of debt crisis and structural problems that Latin Americans were?
No, they did not. They did not. And that's the point, because guess what? When they decide that the protection had been enacted long enough, the protection was dismantled, and then all these models switch from import substitution to export promotion. And when all of these tigers or dragons in East Asia began to export, well, they start generating all this foreign exchange. Remember, all this hard currency, euros, dollars. They didn't have to borrow money. They start financing themselves or self-financing the projects that they had in mind. But in Latin America, they couldn't because they were subject to loans and investment from foreign entities, multilateral agencies. So they missed the boat big time, big time. And again, in hindsight, when you see back in time, in retrospective, it's like, oh man, that's obvious. I mean, how could they, have missed that? Well, it happens. It happens. And it did. Good question.
Can they really be to blame, though, for their sort of reaction to the whole ISI being extended, considering that they had sort of the complete opposite relationship with the West that the East Asian tigers did, because the West was looking for the East Asian tigers to help them grow by outsourcing a lot of manufacturing. And then in terms of Latin America, the West was just trying to keep them down to continue to sort of make money off them and keep them in debt. So they weren't really looking to help them. So I guess sort of the West was sort of helping the East Asian tigers in a way and putting down Latin America. So they were playing sort of both sides, I guess.
Yeah, well, certainly there were significant injections of money by the US and European countries in some of these Asian economies like Taiwan, certainly Singapore by the British and others. But, obviously, I am simplifying a lot here, and I'm glad you are bringing this up, Cody. However, you also need to keep in mind that not everything that went wrong in Latin America was either self-inflicted or coming from outside. It was a combination. It was a combination of both. We can sit down and discuss, whether we can partition this. Okay, 50% of the blame is internal and 50% is external, or no, 90% had to do with the behavior of the West. I don't know. We'll have to, we'll have to sit down and dive deeper into that conversation. But the important thing is that we need to remember that this is not, it's more complicated. It's a combination of internal and external factors. Which ones were, more predominant? I think it varies from country to country in Latin America. Remember, we're talking about almost 30 different countries of different sizes, different geopolitical interests for the West, different natural resource endowments, different size of the populations. The difference, when we think about Latin America, so far we think about this monolithic place where everybody's the same with the same characteristics, but the reality is more like a mosaic. It's like a patch of different. The history is similar. Spain, Brazil, but 300, 400 years later, I think you can find significant differences. In some cases, the differences outweigh the common elements in some Latin American countries. So we will have to also talk about particular countries, or at least particular regions, Central America, South America. Now, since we're on this topic, and I forgot to mention this last time, remember I mentioned this strategy of divide and conquer? 1994, that was the year when the North America Free Trade Agreement was signed. Remember the fast track, Bill Clinton, all these things. Mexico, as part of NAFTA, Canada, US, Mexico, these three countries. Mexico, as part of NAFTA, was seen as a huge hit to the morale in Latin America. Because Latin American countries always saw, in a way, Latin American countries were looking up to countries like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, especially Mexico. At the time was the largest economy in Latin America, close to the US, leading the pack. Yet, Mexico, instead of teaming up with Latin American countries, remember looking south, Mexico decides to join the North. Ooh, you cannot imagine, the uproar amongst certain people in some Latin American countries, intellectuals, economists, political scientists. Many people in Latin America start speaking really bad about Mexico. It's like, you're traitors, man. Why would you side up with these guys that have been exploiting Latin America for so long? You should be joining forces with us, not with these guys, right? So, to your point, Cody, yeah, there are a few things that we have to take into consideration as well in terms of foreign policy by the West. But again, right now I'm just concentrating in Latin America, and that's where we want to go, right?
Gotcha.
Good. Awesome questions, awesome comments. Great, guys. All right. So let me go back to, hold on. I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back to my Word document right here. So I can go back now. So let me start by framing this discussion the following way. Why do we need government? The federal government, state governments, local governments. What's the economic rationale for government intervention? And again, this is not a public policy class, but this is important to understand what I am going to explain later, right? So there are many, many reasons. I am going to summarize all of those reasons for government intervention in just 4, right? So number 1, let me ask you a very weird question so that you understand number 1. So if I say, okay, guys, if you want to buy a police officer, where do you go? Like, what are you talking about? Well, okay. If you want to buy some public bench, where do you buy a public bench? What kind of questions are these, Professor? Well, this is the point. Markets respond really well when private incentives are aligned, but not necessarily public incentives. So let me explain this. who pays for public schools, for the military, the space program, all of these agencies, the highway system, all of these things? We say, okay, it's the government. Well, no, the government doesn't have any money. The money is coming from us. We are taxpayers, and that's the money that the government used to provide public goods and infrastructure. Because if we didn't have the government, there is no market for police officers. There is no market for public benches. There is no market for highways. There is no way to figure out what the proper price is, to allocate resources. No. You need an entity that is going to allocate resources using taxpayers' money and channel these to all of these public goods and services, drinkable water and so forth, right? I have this note of free riders, I don't have time to explain this. I probably can put a link to a video later to explain the problem with free riders in private markets. But the point is that if we had private markets for public goods, we will have a problem of free riding. If you know that somebody else is going to pay and you are going to benefit for what this other is going to pay anyway, you're not going to pay, right? So the example in Econ 40, the principles of economics class, is the following. So imagine a 4th of July event. There is going to be all these fireworks up in the sky. And that's a public good, non-excludable, not rival, because you cannot be prevented from watching it. So would it make sense to sell tickets? Who would buy a ticket? No, I don't want to buy a ticket. All I need to do is to put my chair in the backyard and enjoy the show, right? So what happens? Well, who pays for this then? Well, the government, in this case, the local government, is taking a part of your property tax, hiring a private company that puts a display on, and that's how we enjoy the show. But otherwise, there wouldn't be any show because there is no way to create a private market to sell tickets for the 4th of July fireworks display. I don't know, I can explain that later better, but the point is we need governments to provide public goods and services. And of course, the infrastructure. Number 2, externalities. Pollution is a negative externality and we need to deal with that. Education and health are positive externalities and we need to deal with those. So when I said deal with those, who is going to minimize the impact of pollution? Markets, as I said, are very efficient in the sense of allocating resources to the most productive use. But in the markets, in the market system, there is nothing that prevents this efficiency from generating other costs to bystanders, like pollution, right? So then we have the whole rationale behind Pigouvian taxes to minimize production, minimize pollution, right? The same way we have subsidies. You want to enhance the positive effect of certain activity like education. And that's the whole rationale behind places like Fresno State. Fresno State is a public university because the state government is subsidizing your education. So you don't pay the full amount of the full cost of your education. You only pay a fraction of it. So the idea is to incentivize more people to come so that we have more educated workforce, and then the positive externality is magnified. That's another reason for which we need governments. Number 3, this is an interesting one. Future generations today are not well represented in private preferences. So, especially in the most recent, waves of philosophical approaches to life, we say, okay, enjoy the ride while it lasts. Enjoy your life, live to the max. All of these things. Wait a second. But what happens to your children and the children of your children? Are you thinking about them? Well, they'll figure it out. I'm just living my life. That's the point. So there must be some sort of mechanism that guarantees something to future generations because they haven't even been born. They don't have a voice. And one possibility, not the only one, but one possibility is government, to ensure that we protect the forest, that we protect national resources, that we, guarantee something for the future generations, right? And number 4, the concentration of private power and wealth. And that's debatable. Think about this. Markets are very efficient, yes, but the very nature of markets implies winners and losers. That's the effect of competition. The winners, good for them. What happens to the losers? Right? So the question is, should the government, have a mechanism like a safety net to rescue those that are losing from all of this competitive environment, to repositioning them back again to compete in other markets? So, for example, if they need to be retrained, if they need to be, help with, technical assistance, all of these things. I'm not talking about handouts. I'm talking about ways to ensure that they can back up and compete in a different field so that you have more winners and less losers, right? Anyway, the point is you have at least 4 reasons for government intervention, right? That's the typical political economy rationale that explains the role of governments, right? Let me make a pause here. Any comments, any questions?
Yes, could you clarify the third there, especially compared to the fourth? They seem similar, but the third, you made a reference to parks or national parks, or like institutions, government institutions be created and strengthened for the kids to have a Medicare that will last, or for their kids and on.
Right. Yeah. Number 3 is about future generations, people that have not been born, but they will. And they have no voice, they have no representation now in the decision-making process through market activity. So right now you have, the private benefit and the private cost. That's your supply and demand. Private benefit and private cost. But there is no social benefit, there is no social cost either. So the idea is to figure out, the government needs to figure out how to deal with that problem to ensure that you, in this intersection of benefits and cost, future generations are represented so that we internalize the cost of the decisions today for those in the future, the same way we internalize the potential benefits today for those in the future. So that's the basic idea, Chad, right? And again, this implies institutional. We're going to talk about institutional knowledge in a few minutes. So that's a good point. All right. So let me continue with this. So I am not going to read all of this. You can read this on your own. But here is this box full of questions. What should be the balance between the state and the market, right? That's a key question. Now, the issue I want to highlight is this guy, Danny Roderick. I forgot, actually, I don't know where Danny Roderick is working at anymore. You can look this up online. He's a professor of economics that, for many years led the charge in terms of this discussion. And he discovered very important elements that I already mentioned, that even open economies like the Asian tigers, even the US, which we consider the prime example of economic freedom, even in the US, we have a significant amount of government intervention, even under Republican governments, right? So, it's an illusion to think that, we really live in a free market when you have a huge amount of government intervention, at many levels, from many angles, different, institutions. And this is important, guys, because this is not about getting rid of the government. You know, let me explain something important here. You remember in the 1980s, precisely at the time of the explosion of the debt crisis in Latin America, where the ISA model just, it was clear it didn't work. In the 1980s, guess what happened that fueled even more this desire to minimize the role of the government? Well, remember Reaganomics? Ronald Reagan is elected in the US and Margaret Thatcher is elected as prime minister in England. So these two super powerful countries launch this massive rhetoric, this massive amount of set of policies where, actually, you probably remember these videos where President Reagan said, the government is not the solution to the problem. The government is the problem. Remember that one? So, when you have this combination of historical events, England, the US, led by supply side economics, neoliberal policies, free market mentality, which, has huge amount of benefits, with the implosion or explosion, however you want to see it, of the ISA model in Latin America, you see a dramatic shift in economic policy, a dramatic shift in the way of thinking of many policies. But Roderick said, no, you have to be careful, guys. You have to be careful. Because all you need to do is to figure out what's the proper balance. It's not about moving from one extreme through the other. You have to figure out, to calibrate which areas are proper for markets and which areas are proper for governments to intervene, right? So this is what this box is trying to explain. Now, here's another very important element that I really want you to think about this. When the IMF and the World Bank start implementing these conditions to Latin American countries, many politicians in Latin America, very smart guys, start claiming the following. When things were not going well, in Ecuador, in Guatemala, even in Mexico, the president, the minister of finance of these countries would say, well, you know what, guys, this is not my doing. My hands are tied. The real culprit of the failure of this is the IMF and the World Bank. Oh, think about this. So you can deflect the blame. You can, deviate your own responsibility as an elected officer to somebody else. Oh, that was wonderful for these guys. They were never bad guys. They always had this, I forgot this saying in English, there's somebody else to blame. Anyway, I'll remember that later. But anyway, so let's keep going here. All right. Oh, actually, let me make a pause. Any comments? Any questions?
I have one, and it kind of goes back a little bit to the beginning of the class.
Yes, David.
It's something that I kind of believe, and I want to know if you believe it, is that the main factor for countries becoming wealthy is their culture. Because if you look at the Asian culture, everywhere around the world, most Asian ethnicities are doing well, and even in Asia, they're doing well. They're not on top, but I'm sure in the future they will be, as well as they will all around the world. And the same with the more Caucasian white ethnicity. They all around the world do well, and I think it's because of their culture. And then even Africa, like, people blame the suppression and discrimination, but they're even poor in Africa. And the same with Mexican.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I think that cultural elements play a significant role in economic development of every nation in the world. However, I am not sure that is either the main ingredient or even the only ingredient, right? You know, you know, as an economist, you have to think about natural resources, the institutions surrounding those resources, the history, the neighbor, you know, where they operate. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that there are some historical, political, natural resource considerations in addition to the cultural elements that you are alluding to, David. You know, I remember I forgot who said this, but somebody said something very interesting. You know, it is very dangerous to leave economic problems in the hands of only economists, because economic problems are not just solved with economics tools, right? So to really at least address a serious economic problem like economic development, poverty, all of these things, you need elements of economics, certainly, but you need you need elements of anthropology, sociology, history, all of these combined to really understand the problem, and based on that, try to figure out a solution. So obviously, you know, cultural elements play a huge role here. Yeah. You know, we can talk about this, you know, for days, actually. It's a very important topic. Just David, I thought, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, just one thing I want to add, just because culture does affect everything, the environment. Like you look at the political systems around the world, they're developed by our culture. Our political system is a side effect of the culture we create after the revolution. So I think just like culture just affects such a wide range that you can give culture a huge emphasis, just
Right.
in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's a valid opinion. I see your point. In fact, like I said, I am not discounting the huge importance of cultural elements, David. Yeah, all I'm saying is that I would be hesitant to say that that's the most important one. Maybe in some cases, but probably not all of them. Mm-hmm. Anyway, any other comment? All right. So let's get going here with this next section. All right. Let's talk about some, you know, in the next 4, 6, 7 minutes, some political approaches, some theoretical approaches to government, the role of government. So obviously you have the so-called neo-political economy. I'm talking about Milton Friedman, Hayek, and all of these people that said, you know what, this is the homo economicus, right? Self-interest, rational calculus of economic agents should drive everything. So the government shouldn't be making decisions for the people. The people are smart enough to make their own decisions because they know what's best for them, right? And again, you may espouse this, you may not, that's fine. This is the theory, right? So the basic tenet of this idea is that, you know, the price mechanism is like the compass of the economy. So if the price is up, people buy less. If the price is down, people buy more. You know, that type of thing is like the compass of the economy. So Hayek and Friedman basically said, you don't want to mess with the compass of the economy, with the market mechanism, because that just makes things worse rather than better. you cannot mess with the efficiency of this mechanism, because if you do, you're not going to get the desired outcome. And this is the rationale to say you need to reduce, to limit the size of the state, the size of the government, the role of the government, so that you let markets do their magic. Actually, I'm kind of paraphrasing Ronald Reagan again, because actually in a very famous speech in Cancun in the 1980s, he spoke about the magic of the markets. And, think about this, he was a very popular guy and, well, obviously pretty successful in this type of rhetoric. So for this group of people, free market is the best of all possible worlds, right? And again, obviously, you can read this in deeper in your readings, but also they speak about how bureaucracies can only help to enrich people working in those bureaucracies. That this notion that people behind a desk really cares about people out there is like, no way. They have power, they use it, and they use it well, right? So that's the basic argument of this neopolitical economy, Friedman-Hayek approach, right? Now, then you had another heavyweight, Ronald Coase, Oliver North, this also Nobel Prize in economics, guys. No, I'm talking about Nobel Prize in economics people, not just anybody. They said, hold on, guys, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. We need to consider that institutions play a significant role in the functioning of both markets and government. So this is not as simple to think as governments and markets as enemies. No. That's the wrong framework to see this. What we need to do, and you can read this box, this box right here. What do we mean by institutions? And again, I wish in economics we had a class. Actually, I'm thinking about it to develop a class about institutional economics. But anyway, institutions are, you can read this, defined as the rules of the game of the society and are composed of formal rules as laws, regulations, but also informal rules or constraints, conventions, norms of behavior, self-imposed codes of conduct. And this goes back to your point, David. Cultural elements shape these institutions very much. Notions like discipline, honor, right? I mean, these are things that you cannot quantify. How do you measure honor? How do you measure loyalty? How do you measure discipline? It's very hard, but not because you cannot measure things, they are not important, right? So institutions, Coase, North, Williamson argue, can minimize the malfunctioning of both governments and markets. Because in both cases, you have market failure and government failure. Market failures, you have concentration, monopolies, externalities, all of these things. On the government side, you have all these abusive bureaucracies, corruption. So on both sides of this, seemingly, pair of institutions in conflict, you have all these failures. But if we are able to develop the proper set of institutions that are going to support and self-regulate markets and governments, things could be a lot better. And this is a very important element in economics because it has been gaining a lot of traction, especially when we consider the role of civil society, non-for-profit organizations, charity, many other institutions that typically don't appear in this equation. We normally think about governments, markets, that's it. But wait a second, where do you leave civil society? So rather of thinking about this linear approach where you just need to calibrate between these two, we should probably be thinking about a triangle, right? A triangle. So here is government, on one corner is the government markets, and on the other corner of the triangle is civil society. So we probably need to figure out what's the proper combination between these three, because the institutions I'm talking about include unions, include, the PTA of your school, churches, political parties, even things like, football teams. All of these things are shaping society in ways that have not been fully explored. And that's the point of this institutional economics, which once again goes back to David's point, that is significantly shaped by cultural elements. I have something in the chat and I miss it. Oh, no worries, Cooper. All right. And finally, the new structuralist. They say, well, you may be right, but remember, neo-structuralists are significantly influenced by dependency theory. And notice that I'm using neo because this is a new group of people, not the original structuralist people. There's new generations of people that basically say you need a heavier government intervention to promote, to stimulate missing markets, eliminate distortions like concentration of poverty, and many other things. Obviously, you don't want to go back to these massive governments that are totally inefficient and corrupt. We need to figure out ways to carefully craft governments to particular needs in particular countries, right? So there is another famous economist that said, I'm quoting here, Fisher, no one has yet shown that the failure of government intervention necessarily outweighs market failure. So the question is, we need to first recognize that both governments and markets can fail. But what do we do about it? How do we fix this? Well, then that's the role of the institutional framework that I'm proposing here, right? I've run out of time, guys, so I'm gonna stop here. Questions, comments, very quickly, if you have any.
I just wanted to say real quick, this is what kind of what David was touching up on about the cultural problem. And I somewhat agree, but I just wanted to say, I don't think that's 100% true, just because like in many other countries, people come here and become successful, right? And when it comes to Latin America, even when it comes to, my country of India, and it's just that they're, suppressed. And the way like you were saying too, the institutions are set up there, it doesn't allow them to succeed and develop. And when they come here, into a country that's a little more economically free, they are allowed to prosper, So I just wanted to just say that real quick. But I do agree somewhat though with David though, how it is a cultural problem, but I don't believe that it's 100% cultural problem. I believe, people are allowed to, if the institutions change, I feel like the country could develop.
Right. Yeah, we are going to continue talking about the importance of the institutional framework for economic development and in the context of political economy. So, yes, all these comments are welcome. Thank you, guys. Anybody else? I don't want to cut anybody. I know I'm out of time, but I don't want to cut anybody. All right. I'll pick up this on recording for Friday class. So. Thank you, guys. I will see you next on Monday live. Bye.
Have a good day, Dr. Avalos.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording now.